Hi everyone, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we'll be doing an overview of Castelnuovo 1539, the upcoming two-player block wargame about the siege of Castelnuovo. This game is designed by Francisco Ranco and being brought to Kickstarter on June 17th, 2025 by Draco Ideas. Before we jump in and take a look at the game, let's set the history of this siege. The siege of Castelnuovo took place in July 1539 during what's called the Ottoman-Habsburg conflict over the Mediterranean. The walled town, now modern-day Herceg-Novi in Montenegro, had been captured by Spanish forces the previous year. Ottoman Admiral Hayreddin Barbarossa besieged the town by both land and sea and offered an honorable surrender to Francisco de Sarmiento, the Spanish commander. The Spaniards refused the offer, however, even though they knew there was no hope of relief, saying "Que vengan cuando quieran," let them come whenever they want, more modernly translated as "come get some," or perhaps even "nuts." In the ensuing siege, the defending Spaniards inflicted 8,000 to 20,000 losses on the Ottomans, but were eventually overwhelmed. Nearly all of the roughly 4,000 Spaniards, including Sarmiento, were killed. Though the fall of Castelnuovo ended Christian hopes in the eastern Mediterranean, the bravery of the Spaniards became legendary across Europe. So I've got Castelnuovo 1539 spread out in front of us, and let's do an overview of the game before we jump in and take a look at the individual pieces. Castelnuovo 1539 is a two-player, card-driven, block-based game based on the famous siege that we talked about earlier. One player takes control of the besieging Ottomans, and the other player is going to control the outnumbered but determined Spaniards. Gameplay length is listed as 60 to 90 minutes for the main scenario, and a solitaire mode and an introductory scenario are in development as I'm making this video. Now, the historical length of the game is about 1 month, which was the length of the historical siege. Turn length is a little abstract and indefinite as the battle continues until one side or the other reaches their victory conditions, and we'll talk more about those as we look closer at the game. Unit scale is also slightly abstract. The 4,000 Spanish defenders are represented by 16 blocks, and 32 blocks represent the roughly 50,000 attacking Ottomans. Let's touch briefly now on the key mechanics and elements of gameplay. As we mentioned, this is a block-based game, and you'll stand your blocks up and play so that only you know their strength, and hidden information, therefore, is going to play a role in the game. The map is also an area control map with sections representing parts of the town, the countryside, and the adjacent water. Gameplay is card-driven as well. Players will play cards for actions, orders, combat, reactions, and events. Another interesting aspect of gameplay is what's called the assault phase. The Ottoman player can declare one of these, which basically represents an acceleration of the siege. There are more cards, some actions are excluded, and the Ottoman player suffers a casualty just for declaring this. It sounds to me like a clever way to simulate the irregular nature of siege warfare. We've got a variety of units in the game: cavalry, pikemen, arquebusiers, artillery, and infantry. And combat has a taste of rock, paper, scissors to it. For example, pikemen get to attack first against cavalry when in open or rough terrain. And speaking of combat, battle results are determined by chucking dice, with in general 5 and 6s being hits, but die roll modifiers play a role as well. As in many other block games, units that take these hits take them as step losses and will rotate to show the current strength of the unit at the top of the block. Leaders are represented in the game as well and have an influence on combat. And lastly, we've got several elements of siege warfare, things like walls, bastions, artillery, trenches, and chevaux de frise. Let's take a look at the rulebook. This is not a final version of the rulebook, as an introductory scenario and solo rules are in development and will get added. At the moment, it stands at 32 pages, but there are a good bit of artistic flourishes, a rather hefty amount of historical context sprinkled through the rules, and a good chunk of graphics and diagrams and displays. I've read through the good chunk of the rules now, and I will also add that I really appreciate the history they have embedded in the rules. A particular rule will often have a paragraph explaining the history of the battle nearby, which gives so much more context to the rule itself. I'll also say that the writing here is very sharp and clear. A true test is always when playing the game, but the writing here is crisp, and so far I feel like all the rules have made great sense. I've got a two-player game of this planned for the upcoming weekend, so I will know more about gameplay after I get a chance to dig in. Complexity-wise, I'll give this game a 3.5 out of 10. It's got a level more depth than what I expected in a 90-minute block-based game, but I mean that in a good way. The way the units interact in combat and the subtlety of the cards seem to hint at gameplay that's going to be nuanced and engaging. Solitaire-wise, I hesitate to give this a rating yet. A solo mode where you can play as the Spanish defenders is in testing now, but it's hard to say what the final outcome will be, so I'll go with a rather vague 6 to 10 rating on a scale of 1 to 10 for Solitaire. And at the moment, there again is the one main scenario, but I know an introductory learning scenario is in development as well. Let's play with blocks. There are a variety of types and sizes and purposes here. First up, we're looking at the units. So the Spanish forces are represented here on the left by the 16 red blocks, and I've put the stickers on all of them already. And we can see with the units, they have dots on them to indicate strength. And again, you rotate the unit to represent losses, and they'll be facing up so your opponent can't see their strength until you get into combat. Here in the right, we can see the Ottoman forces, and these combat units are all 3/4 of an inch, so standard block size. We can also see we've got a variety of types of units on the left here, the arbuskers here for the Spanish, pikemen, cavalry for the Ottomans, pikemen, and I believe these are standard infantry. And in addition to the units, we've got a bunch of other blocks here. These on the left represent the walls of the city. There are 13 of them. The Ottoman trying to knock down them so they can get inside the city. We have a few more units with stickers. This is Sarmiento, the Spanish leader. Then we have 3 Ottoman leaders and 2 ships. This is a casualty marker that used to tracking progress on Ottoman casualties. And this, I believe, is a civilian marker that has a special function in gameplay. These triangular pieces here are bastions, Spanish bastions, and then we have Spanish and Ottoman artillery. These are the chevaux de frise here, and then on the right, these squiggly things, these zigzag things, are Ottoman trenches that they can build. So a lot of gameplay pieces here that are reflecting siege warfare, of course. Player aids. The game comes with 1 player aid, but there will be 2 copies of this in the final version, 1 for each player. It's got 2 sides, one a collection of general information, and the other side here is a combat aid. And this is a good time also to mention that combat has its own mini sequence of play and has a fair bit going on. Some units can attack before others, and die roll modifiers and card play can shift its nature as well. So it's a pretty robust combat system for a block-based game, in a good way again. Let's take a look at our cards now. The game comes with 72 cards, 2 decks of asymmetrical 36 cards for each side. These decks are broken down into 5 types of cards. These red cards here are action cards, and the rules state that these are the most commonly played cards. They can be used to initiate attacks on your opponents. Order cards, represented by these here, allow you to perform specific actions like movement and bombardment. Combat cards, with this yellow flash here, are laid out before combat starts and then can be used to influence specific battles. And reaction cards, which the Spanish have a lot of, by the way, allow you to take counteractions to try to diminish the effectiveness of an enemy's action card. Lastly, there is this storm, which is the one immediate event card. And some cards like this this reaction card here, this counterattack card, can be played as either a reaction or an action card. This is probably a good time to talk about one element of game design that gets mentioned in the rules, and the designers really wanted to make the defensive role, an active one. Often in a one-way attack game or a siege game like this, the defender has little to do, but the rules specifically mention that the Spanish player must be aggressive and attack in order to win, but has to pick weak spots and well-timed counterattacks for this strategy to be successful. The intention in the game here is that the Spanish player who sits on her heels defending will not get the Spanish victory. I'm really curious to see how this element of the game plays out. Before we look at the map, I want to mention the game comes with 16 6-sided dice, and that should give you an idea that combat can involve significant numbers of dice getting tossed around. Let's explore the 21-inch by 29-inch fully mounted map now. For context, we can see Castelnuovo here in the middle, bordering on the Mediterranean, and then we've got the surrounding countryside. I feel like this is a very subdued color palette in play here, with the shading of gray and blue, giving this a very historic feel. Definitely an emphasis on functionality and a kind of a less is more type of design. I'm very curious to see how this looks with all the blocks and the units in play. And while we've got the map out, let's talk a little bit about victory conditions. There is no turn limit, and the game ends with whichever side reaches their victory state first. The Spaniards win by inflicting casualties. We can see here on the left the casualty track, and the Spaniards need 12 points on this track to immediately win the game. They can get these points by destroying Ottoman units, of course, but also Ottoman leaders, and also when the Ottoman player declares an assault, it costs them a point too. The Ottoman player wins by either destroying all the Spanish units or by occupying these 3 main fortified locations in Castelnuovo with the 3, the 2, and the 2 in the red stars here. And there you have it, a look at the upcoming Castelnuovo 1539, designed by Francisco Ronco and published by Draco Ideas. The Kickstarter campaign launches June 17th, 2025, and there is a link in the video down below to that campaign if you want to check it out. Now, I'll be shooting a gameplay video as well, and we'll link that here as soon as it's ready. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day.